Fort Lewis, Washington, August 1944. Steam slicks the platform and the canteen's glass fogs where tubs of vanilla ice cream sit beside a row of sweating Coca-Cola bottles. Obergefreiter Hans Keller steps down from a Pullman car that still smells of coal cinders and damp wool. An MP points with 2 fingers, Army polite, toward in processing under the office of the Provost Marshal General. Fingerprints, a brief medical, tags on the duffel he never carried. Parity rations, the clerk says, like weather. Same as base camp troops. Keller nods as if he understands, though the phrase lands strange in his ears. Sergeant May Mac McAllister, Quartermaster Corps, would have checked reefer trucks on the siding, thermometer logs, fuel levels, gaskets. She speaks in car numbers and minutes on step, a conductor of cold. "You'll find the PX there," she says, chin toward the hum of a generator and the clean metallic smell of a new standpipe. Keller follows the noise and stares through the glass, as if at a cathedral reliquary. The girl behind the counter waits, bored and kind. Ice cream or Coke? He chooses both. The spoon ticks porcelain like a tiny bell. The cold invades his teeth. The sugar lights his skull. In Europe, his company had boiled ersatz coffee from roasted barley. Here, dessert arrives with military punctuality. A corporal signs for a stack of manifests. A switcher coupler claps twice on the main, and a refrigerated car breathes white. Keller asks in halting English whether all prisoners eat this way. Mac answers with a shrug that feels like mercy. It's the convention and its logistics. She means the 1929 Geneva Rules and a republic that built 2,710 Liberty ships in 4 years, sending grain out and bringing prisoners back on the return leg, so nothing sails light. Keller pockets the wooden spoon like a keepsake. On the bulletin board, a typed sheet lists tomorrow's canteen stock: chocolate bars, cigarettes, postcards. He doesn't believe any of it and believes it all. Somewhere a bugle sounds retreat, and the fogged pane clears as the canteen cools for the night. He looks at the empty bowl, then the rail lines vanishing into the dark, and feels a new kind of fear, the kind that comes when a man glimpses the size of the machine he is up against. Before Reveille, the mess office glows with a single lamp, ledger lines under a steel ruler. Sergeant McAllister checks yesterday's issue against today's draw. Flour, canned peaches, powdered milk, meat by the ton. She pencils the base camp target, about 4,000 calories per man, adjusted for labor, because doctrine, like the rails, runs straighter when weight is known. A junior clerk grimaces. "Ma'am, ice cream for Germans?" Mac keeps the ruler steady. "Yes, it's Article 11 and its efficiency. Healthy prisoners work, working prisoners harvest, harvest feeds armies." The pencil taps twice like a gavel. On the siding, a refrigerator car idles, doors sweating. Mac flips pages on reefer rotations. Pre-cool, time on step, allowable rise curves, relief units staged 2 tracks over. She signs for a 10-in-1 group ration pallet. Menus printed like music, 10 men fed from a single crate, then walks the line to the PX where cigarettes and chocolate arrive with the same precision as socks. Keller hovers at the threshold, respectful as a private before a colonel. "All this for us?" he asks. "For everyone," she answers. "Parity isn't charity." It's a schedule, he nods, hearing a doctrine shaped like a timetable. Time shifts. April 1944, 6 states and a world away. Corporal Isaiah Turner, field artillery, stands at a southern lunchroom door with 2 black soldiers in pressed khaki. The hostess points them to the kitchen as 2 German POWs, flanked by MPS, slide into a booth, and order eggs. Turner swallows the heat in his throat and later, in a quiet barracks, writes the letter he will send to Yank. If we can feed enemies with dignity, we can seat citizens with the same. He folds the page, thinks of the guns he crews, and addresses the envelope with a steady hand. Back at Fort Lewis, the rain returns, tin on canvas. Mac initials a labor request from a Minnesota cannery and staples it to a movement order. The OPMG stamp lands like a drumbeat. Keller watches Americans treat rules not as cages, but as levers. In his army, law felt like a wall. Here, regulation becomes a ramp. He pockets a canteen chit and studies the timetable pinned beside the duty roster, the spine of a country bent on time. The lamp snaps off. Outside, a switchman lifts a lantern, green to proceed. The reefer's compressor catches, a smooth, rising hum. The whole base seems to inhale, ready to move what it must, exactly when it must. Earlier that year, Moorhead, Minnesota, May 1944, the air tastes of tin and steam. Dawnlight ladders through high windows onto Ruth Sorensen's cannery floor, where lids clatter and the pressure gauge trembles toward the mark. Outside, the Red River runs cold. Inside, heat carries the smell of peaches and beans. An OPMG sergeant reads the movement order, then hands Ruth a clipboard. 12 German POWs, 1 corporal interpreter, 2 guards. You'll get them back fed and on time, he says, meaning it. The work would have been simple and exacting. Lift, rinse, trim, fill. Keller, weeks from Fort Lewis by a different route, takes the scale position and learns the dance. 8 cans per rack, seals checked by feel, every 100th tin pulled for QC. Ruth explains how the night shift hands the line to days without a hiccup, because food never sleeps in wartime. She points to the rail spur beyond the loading door. 2 reefer cars wait, pre-cooled, doors chalked with capacity and departure times. The foreman balances trays on calloused palms, then shouts the cadence that keeps wrists and boilers in agreement. At noon, the canteen opens. The guards exchange scrip at the cashier, 80 cents per man for outside labor, good for cigarettes, chocolate, postcards, ice cream. Keller would have hesitated, then chosen the sweet cold again, as if to test whether yesterday's miracle repeated. It does. Ruth watches him eat with the look of a woman who has stacked lean winters and knows what abundance does to a face. Numbers arrive like truth. The cannery logs, 16-hour days, 2 shifts, 2 reefers spotted each night. Rail dispatch wants on time, full weight, seals unbroken. Ruth's pencil moves the way a battery officer plots fire, precise, unsurprised by volume. America canning food around the clock feels normal because the nation has decided it will be. In 1944 alone, the United States exported egg products on a scale that sounds like misprint, hundreds of millions of dozens, near 700 million, while still feeding GIs, allies abroad, and hundreds of thousands of prisoners to base camp standards. When the sun drops behind the grain elevators, breath fogs at the dock as the reefer doors slide shut. Ruth signs the manifest and watches a lantern swing green on the main. Back by 2000, the sergeant says, and the column forms. Keller looks once at the lit windows, the machine that turns orchards into rations, and understands why the war feels decided in a place like this. Harbor lamps burn halos into the fog, and a winch whines like a high violin as sides of beef vanish through a steel mouth into a refrigerated hold. On the pier, the air tastes of brine and machine oil. Up the gangway, a quartermaster corporal steadies a clipboard with 2 fingers and reads weight from the way a pallet sways. Obergefreiter Hans Keller pauses and feels the same vertigo he felt before the canteen glass. There is always more. Beyond the cranes, rows of Liberty hulls wait with their bluff bows toward the shipping lanes, and farther downriver, a Victory ship lifts smoke like a promise. Sergeant May Mac McAllister traces the cold chain with a stubby pencil. Pre-cool the reefers, charge the coils, thermometer checks at the siding, roll to depot, issue by menu. The doctrine is simple because it must be: feed base camp troops to standard House POWs by Geneva parity, keep the schedule indifferent to weather. She taps a 10-in-1 ration crate, 10 men one day, menus printed like a hymn book, and reminds a private that palates do not argue. They just go. Keller reads English from labels as if decoding signals: corned beef, powdered milk, peaches heavy in syrup. The syllables feel like equipment. Ruth Sorensen's world joins the same river. A reefer car exhales white breath and swallows the afternoon's pack from her cannery, lids pinging as they cool. The smell is coffee from a tug's galley, citrus from a ruptured crate, hot insulation from a generator. Foremen call time in short syllables, a second language of cadence. Mac notes what a civilian might miss. In 1944, the United States shipped egg products in quantities that read like a misprint, hundreds of millions of dozens, and still had enough to feed GIs, allies, and prisoners to standard. Numbers here are not boasts. They are instructions. Keller leans on the rail where the tide knuckles at the pilings. A bosun waves, lines come up like serpents. A Liberty hull shoulders the water and points at a longitude already plotted with cargo manifests and meals. The ship's name is Paint and Welding Rod. Its meaning is arithmetic. Somewhere inland, a mess sergeant will count calories near 4,000 per man, and a camp clerk will initial a canteen list without drama. Keller watches the gray shape dwindle and understands he has not met a nation. He has entered a system. It moves with the indifference of weather and the mercy of full plates, and it does not notice him at all. Ceiling fans chop the heat into ribbons while the smell of bacon and coffee clings to the paint. April 1944. A southern rail stop. Corporal Isaiah Turner, red-piped artillery on his sleeve and shine on his boots, reaches the lunchroom door with 2 other black soldiers and feels the room tense. The hostess points them to the kitchen. At the same moment, 2 German POWs, caps off, guarded but relaxed, slide into a booth and accept menus without a word. Their eyes flicker with the same disbelief Hans Keller knew at a canteen case, though for a different reason entirely. Turner stands his ground because that is what the Army has taught him. Hold position, maintain fire discipline, choose your moment. His sergeant grips his elbow and says, "Low, not today." Outside, freights roll. A reefer car hums like distant bees. Turner tastes the metal of held words and walks to the baggage room where a colored porter passes him a sandwich through a side door, with the apology written in his eyes. He eats in the draft from a window and watches the booth where the enemy eats at a table he helped defend. That night, in a barracks that smells of saddle soap and wet wool, Turner writes the letter to Yank, the Army Weekly. He keeps it clean, no heat, only artillery precision. We feed our enemies according to the Geneva Convention, and rightly so. Then let us seat our citizens according to the Constitution. He signs, folds, and addresses the envelope, sealing it with the small declarative press of a thumb. Up the coast, someone will sort that letter with thousands of others. But this sentence will travel farther than he knows. At a POW camp days later, Keller hears talk of a black corporal who wrote a brave letter and cannot square the paradox. A country that hands him ice cream and a Coke, that issues parity rations by rule, and yet fails a man wearing American chevrons. Sergeant McAllister, hearing the same story in the mess office, says only, We must be as efficient with justice as we are with freight. She checks a ledger, moves a pallet order, and signs for scrip, 80 cents a day for outside labor, because the machine must keep good time while the people learn to do the same. The depot whistle cries 2 short and 1 long. A lantern drops from red to green. Somewhere a clerk pins a rail map under onion skin for a briefing titled The Math. The briefing room smells of chalk dust and wet canvas. A U.S. rail map spreads across the wall, arteries and veins under onion skin, pins like bright wounds at ports, depots, and camps. Sergeant May Mac McAllister waits for the room to settle, then raps the pointer once. We are going to talk about sums, not stories. She draws a line from an Atlantic pier to an inland stockade and writes the first number, 425,000. That is the count of German prisoners processed into the United States since 1942. She writes the next, roughly 700. That is the number of camps and branches that house them across 40-plus states, with peak strength of about 371,000 Germans in May 1945. The pointer moves to a ship silhouette. 2,710 Liberty ships, she says almost gently, plus hundreds of Victory ships on the later legs. They carried wheat, meat, milk powder, and sometimes the very prisoners whose rations we are discussing. On the sideboard, she prints the daily target that has become muscle memory, about 4,000 calories per soldier in base areas, adjusted for labor and climate, because strength is a scheduled commodity. Keller stands in the back by the door and translates each word in his head, feeling the arithmetic arrive like a barrage. McAllister adds the line that changes the room's air. Food we ship to our allies is measured by the million tons. To the Soviet Union alone, wartime deliveries of foodstuffs reach roughly 4.4 million tons. At one point early in 1943, American food supplied about 17% of the Red Army's calories and roughly half of its fats. She does not raise her voice. The numbers do that for her. Ruth Sorensen, invited because her cannery never misses a quota, thinks of lids pinging like tiny bells and tries to imagine 1,000,000 tons ringing at once. Finally, the impossible-sounding line for the day's takeaway. In 1944, this country exported egg products on the order of 700 million dozen and still fed our forces, our allies, and our captives to standard. The pointer rests. Numbers are operations. Operations win wars. Keller feels the floor tilt. He had been trained to read topography and fire plans. No one had taught him how to fight arithmetic. Outside, a reefer coupler claps twice. The map rustles as someone breathes. The door opens onto air cold enough to carry far, and the men file out toward a system already moving. Steam hangs in the depot like breath over a boxing ring, and the temperature needle on reefer 312 creeps past the line that means spoiled meat. Sergeant May Mac McAllister is at the door before the yardmaster finishes swearing. "Allowable rise?" she asks. 4 degrees over 2 hours, ma'am, the corporal replies. They are 30 minutes from the threshold. Mac takes a pencil from behind her ear and sketches the workaround on a waybill, pull citrus reefers off the west spur, cross-tie compressors with piggyback hoses, borrow ice from the brewery, shade track the hot car, and roll a standby generator onto the adjacent flat. She points once. The yard moves. Reefer 312 snorts white as hoses couple with a pair of dull clanks. The first cross-connect hammers air through the coils. The second settles into a steady, saving hiss. A private reads dial faces aloud while Mac counts in her head, BTUs, Delta T, minutes on step, and the yard seems to wait with him. Across the fence, prisoners on trash detail pause at the sound, certain only that something heavy is being put right. 2 degrees down, the private says. Hold her. Mac walks the length of the car, laying a bare palm on the steel skin the way a gun captain touches a breech before shouting, "Ready." It would have become standard inside the week, redundancy as habit, the brewery ice added to an SOP, the shade track pre-cleared on hot afternoons. The write-up notes the compressor failure, the improvised piggyback, the saved load counted in pounds and meals. Ruth Sorensen hears about it in a phone call that sounds like a friend reporting good weather. "Your meat holds," the sergeant says. "Keep your pack hot and your seals clean." She hangs up smiling, because competence is the most generous kind of abundance. By evening, the needle nests back under the safe mark. Mac circles the final reading and initials it with the satisfaction of a gun crew watching rounds land true. The sun throws long ladder rungs across the yard. A switcher groans. A lantern swings green. Reefer 312 slides toward the main with the quiet dignity of a patient who has turned the corner. In the office, a new line appears under SOP. No hot car moves alone again. Outside the wire, Hans Keller tastes cantaloupe and decides, without knowing doctrine or BTUS, that Americans fix things before they break. Dawn writes silver on the irrigation ditch, and the field smells of dew, soil, and the faint sweetness of cantaloupe warmed under blankets of straw. Hans Keller joins the work detail with a guard who walks like a metronome, rifle slung, boredom disciplined into vigilance. The foreman speaks a harvest liturgy, row, tote, weigh, load, and points to the stake truck that will nose the rutted road to the rail spur by 1400. Keller trims vines clean, hands sticky, and measures America one fruit at a time, the sun lifting like a stopwatch over the rows. The breakfast would have startled any man raised on ration cards. Bread, meat, fruit, hot coffee poured from a scalded tin. At the mid-morning rest, the guards cash in scrip, 80 cents a day for outside labor, and the canteen cashier counts change the way a supply sergeant counts fuses. Keller buys ice cream again, a practice as regular as roll call. A bee tests the orange peel on a nearby crate, a mule brays. Someone quotes a joke from Stars and Stripes none of them quite understands, but all of them enjoy. Because laughter is a ration, too. Ruth Sorensen arrives to check crate weights and transfer times, 20 minutes from shade to truck, no more than 10 from truck to reefer deck, and notes with pleasure the evenness of the numbers. 16-hour days when needed, 2 shifts passing like relays. She watches the guard let a prisoner climb into the truck bed to stack crates tight, trust built on predictability and the Geneva rules that keep calories near 4,000 for heavy labor. The system assumes men will work better when fed and proves itself daily, one cooled load at a time. Corporal Isaiah Turner rides past with trainees in a rattling deuce and a half, instructing cadence as the truck bucks in ruts. He would have looked out at the bowed heads in the rows and thought about the letter already traveling north, a piece of paper with a fuse burning. At 13:58, the stake truck noses to the spur. At 14:05, the doors of the reefer breathe white and cold and swallow the day's sweetness as if the nation were a single patient throat. The guard signs, Ruth countersigns, and Keller wipes his knife clean on a rag that smells of melon and dust, then climbs aboard, already learning how this country turns hunger into schedule. The wheels knock a rhythm over the joints, and Keller, drowsy with sugar and sun, counts them like a metronome set to victory. The heat lifts off the road and shimmers as the work detail approaches the diner at the gate, and the smell of bacon and coffee drifts out. Hans Keller slows, because habits survive fences. Corporal. Isaiah Turner, on post with trainees, slows for reasons that never change. The hostess does not look up when the POWs pass. The sign that bars Isaiah's men from the tables is old, the paint worn by fingers that never apologized. Ruth Sorensen arrives with 2 coolers and says nothing to the hostess at all. She walks to the sidewalk and opens the latches, handing out lunch pails to the prisoners and the soldiers alike, her face set in the expression of someone who trusts schedules more than tempers. The MPs would have logged the scene without adjectives. 12:30 hours, distribution equalized, no incident. Later, in the camp, discipline statistics show an uptick in order whenever work is steady and food predictable. The graph looks like a heartbeat settling under a sure hand. Script circulates through the canteen like a tame river, 80 cents a day earning back in chocolate, cigarettes, postcards, ice cream. And inventories align because the quartermaster balances them with the same care applied to ammunition lots. Keller watches the pails pass and feels the strange physics of a place where dignity can be counted. He had believed in machines of a different sort, torsion bars, fuel pumps, breech blocks, measured with a machinist's pride. Here the machine runs on menus and timetables. Numbers that once sounded like fable repeat until they feel ordinary. 425,000 German POWs processed into roughly 700 camps. 2,710 Liberty ships launched. A single year exporting egg products near 700 million dozen while still feeding GIs, allies, and captives to base camp standards. Statistics that look impossible on paper behave like weather in practice. Always there. Indifferent, undeniable. Turner thanks Ruth with a nod that carries more than gratitude. He taps a finger on the cooler lid as if testing a gun shield, then drills his squad on left face, right face, the staccato dance of order. Keller sits on the curb, eats, and offers the apple from his pail to a passing kid who stares at his field gray sleeve and grins anyway. When the whistle at the spur calls the afternoon pickup, both men stand automatically, bound by different oaths to the same timetable. The lantern at the switch drops from red to green, and the train slides forward as if drawn by mathematics itself. The warehouse scale's needle trembles, settles, then jumps again as another pallet kisses the platform. The clerk's pencil makes a soft, satisfied click that sounds, "To Sergeant." May Mac McAllister, like the end of a good fire mission. Year-end tallies line the desk, tons issued, railcar turns, calories planned and consumed. Outside, a forklift noses through a sheet of cold air, and the breath of men rises like incense. Mac totals the figure that matters, how many meals moved without drama, and prints the number clean, knowing that invisibility is the highest honor in logistics. If no one noticed, it worked. Ruth Sorensen stands on a catwalk at the cannery, lids pinging as they cool like 1,000 distant bells, and reads the telegram that lands like a commendation. All quotas met, spoilage below tolerance, rail on time. She thinks of the midnight phone call about Reefer 312 and smiles the way a corporal smiles when a gun crews as one. Down on the floor, a kid from the night shift scrawls VE on a crate in grease pencil, then wipes it away, embarrassed at the wish. Hans Keller writes home at a wooden table by a barrack stove, careful to avoid anything a censor would strike. He describes weather, scenery, and a strange, small luxury, choosing. He notes, without complaint and with some awe, that rations arrive like trains, on schedule, in weight, indifferent to weather. He folds the page, picturing the Red River's cold shine and a canteen case where decisions are not moral tests, but habits. Corporal Isaiah Turner opens Yank and sees his letter in print, neatly set between cartoons and a story about winter boots. The words feel heavier than when he wrote them. He takes them to the mess hall and reads aloud without heat, as if calling corrections on a gun line. If we honor our articles abroad, honor our articles at home. The sergeant nods, says nothing, and orders seconds for the table because there is enough, and a soldier can make a point on a full stomach. By evening, Mac has a neat sheet. 425,000 German POWs processed into roughly 700 camps. Daily targets near 4,000 calories held steady. 2,710 Liberty ships and hundreds of Victory ships, ensuring nothing sails light. She caps her pen, breathes the cold, and listens to the base exhale. The needle on the warehouse scale dips, steadies, and waits for tomorrow's load. The announcement arrives like summer thunder, radios crackling, whistles loosed without orders, lids rattling on catwalk rails. A forklift operator kills the engine mid-turn and stands with both hands on the wheel. The room is suddenly church quiet, then erupting as if a pressure valve has lifted. Sergeant May Mac McAllister reaches for the shutdown binder she has prepped for months, a calm choreography of drawdowns and hand receipts. She would have smiled at the neat inevitability. The same system that fed a war can close a war without knocking dishes off the shelf. Ruth Sorensen posts a cardboard square above line B. Civilian labels resume. The ink runs a little in the steam. She hugs a mechanic who smells of valve grease and night shifts and cries into his denim without apology. The floor boss blows his whistle like a coach and calls for a last push to meet the day's rail, because victory still eats, and schedules carry on even when history changes its gait. Outside, kids wave flags. A church bell gets stuck on joy and rings itself hoarse. Hans Keller receives repatriation orders on a form marked with a ship's name and a date, and he tucks it into his pocket as if it might evaporate. He trades a final canteen chit for a Coca-Cola and a postcard of Mount Rainier, writing only "alive," and leaves the rest to the picture. Men compare routes home the way soldiers everywhere compare routes to the front, by ports, by rumors, by the soundness of ships. A staff sergeant explains the manifests as though he were reading a train table. Nobody wants drama on water. Corporal Isaiah Turner shakes hands with a white MP who read his letter in Yank and says, "You said it right." The compliment lands like a small medal. Turner returns it with a nod and the old artillery cadence, "Steady, on my command." He looks at the mess line, at seconds handed without question, and imagines a country where the line into any lunchroom will look like this. He does not know the exact date, only the direction. By sundown, the flag has the tired look of a runner at the tape. Mac locks the warehouse with the same untheatrical click she uses every night. Somewhere on the river, a tug sounds two long and one short. The base breathes, not in relief, but in momentum. Tomorrow, they start making a different kind of time. The canteen hums to itself in the morning cool, compressor a soft, faithful note in the key of sufficiency. A lone spoon rests on porcelain like a marker on a map of what was won by schedules and mercy. Sergeant May Mac McAllister compiles the final briefing she has always wanted to give. Not a victory speech, a balance sheet, 425,000 German POWs housed to standard in roughly 700 camps. Daily intake near 4,000 calories kept like a vow. 2,710 Liberty ships, and 500-plus Victory ships built so fast a hull slid off the ways every couple of days. Food to allies by the million tons, to the USSR alone approximately 4.4 million tons, at one point covering approximately 17% of Red Army calories and approximately 50% of its fats. Numbers that looked like myth behaved, under discipline, like weather. Ruth Sorensen walks the line without a clipboard, touching the cool lids, hearing the tiny pings slow as the metal settles. She will go home and learn to sleep through silence again, She thinks about how a nation turned orchards and fields into steel-rimmed meals, how competence at scale can feel like tenderness. The machine never loved anyone, but it allowed people to, a lunch pail pressed into a hand at the gate, a schedule that assumed dignity was efficient. Hans Keller boards a ship east with a pocket full of small American things: postcard, dull spoon, a photograph of a reefer car breathing white, and a larger thing he cannot pack: the knowledge that he lost to arithmetic. He will tell his brother that defeat tasted like ice cream and coffee, that abundance announced itself not as parade but as routine. He will work in a factory and scan manifests without meaning to, hearing the pulse of a system that fed him even as it fought him. Corporal Isaiah Turner tucks Yank into a footlocker and steps into a future that will test his patience and reward his stubbornness. He has learned that a schedule can be a promise as well as a plan. He wants a country where justice keeps time like freight. Mac stands before a small audience: clerks, cooks, drivers, guards, and closes the ledger. Operations win wars, she says, and values decide what operations are for. She clicks off the light. The compressor keeps humming, and the spoon stays put, quiet proof that a free people turned industry into mercy and mercy into might, until scarcity had nothing left to say.